Welcome back to Between the Lines podcast. We're recording our eighth episode today, and we're joined by our second ever guest, Rohan. Honored to have you on here. How do you feel about joining us for the pod today?
Yeah, it feels great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so today we're pretty much just going to talk about all NBA stuff. The playoffs going on. So by the time this recording is posted, we'll be in the second round starting up, and we're just going to give our predictions for all four matchups. So let's get started in the West, and we're going to have the Oklahoma City Thunder one seed taking on the four seed Los Angeles Lakers. And you want to get us started with your prediction, Ron?
Yeah, I think this one will be a tough one to say, but I'm gonna have to do OKC in 5 games, 4-1. I think the Lakers had a good stretch last series and put up a good fight, but I just think the Rockets were a better matchup for the Lakers because they both have a good front court, but with OKC, the younger, more athletic guards will give the Lakers some trouble. And so I think if the Lakers do want to steal a game or two, it's gonna have to come with like controlling the pace and slowing down the offense completely because OKC loves to run on transition. So, but OKC's proved last series that they're very dominant. So it'll be hard to kind of steal the series for the Lakers.
Yeah, I mean, I got Lakers in. No, no, I got OKC in five as well. um, as much as my heart wants me to pick the Lakers, being realistic, we saw these teams match up four times in the regular season, and like OKC won on average by 30 points, so it really wasn't ever close. And then now add in like potentially not even having Luka Doncic for the whole series. The reports say like he might return by game four, but we'll see if that happens. He's dealing with like the hamstring strain, so you never really know. It's a pretty tough injury. He hasn't even started running yet, so I mean, we'll see what happens, but ultimately OKC is just like it's there. The West runs through them, in my opinion. As much as I want LeBron to give us a vintage, series, turn back the clock, maybe get a game off OKC, I think OKC takes care of it in five pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I'm same line as you guys. I'm taking OKC in five. Like you said, I would love to see another like throwback LeBron series like we just got. But you guys touched on everything. There's really not much else to add for this one, unfortunately. It's just OKC is just too dominant of a team with like too many good perimeter defenders. Obviously led by Lou Dort, Kason Wallace too. Good like rim protection too and everything. It just makes it hard for teams to score on it, especially a team like that's as offensively limited without their star Luka Doncic in the Lakers right now. Which, as a recorder, we got a report from Shams earlier this morning. He's going to be out for at least the first 2 games, and there's no timetable for him to return. So, do we even see him return the series if it goes to 5 or 6 games? We're not sure about that. We would like to see him back out there, but more than likely we won't be able to. OKC also dealing with some injuries, right? Jalen Williams, J Dub, their forward one. He didn't play in the last 2 games of the Sun series. I think more than likely he should be back because it looked like he didn't have as much of a serious injury as Luka did. But there are some injury aspects on their end of it. But I just think it's too much for the Lakers to handle, so I'm going to take OKC in five as well.
Yeah, unfortunate, but I mean, it's just the right pick. I think all of us, we're thinking straightforward here.
All right, so the next series we're going to talk about and preview is the other Western Conference Semifinals series, and that is the San Antonio Spurs taking on the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Wolves obviously upsetting the Nuggets in their last first round series, winning over the Nuggets in 6 games, and the Spurs dispatching the Blazers pretty easily. Wemby missing that one game, but still no issues there. Spurs take care of the Blazers in 5 games. So we have this series right here. And while I did predict this series coming into the playoffs, I don't think I predicted it going this way in terms of how the first round played out. I didn't really think this would happen, especially with the amount of injuries the Wolves suffered in that first round. But they just found a way to get through that, and I was just like really shocked by just their pure grit and determination to be able to get through that series against a really talented team and really talented player in Jokic. But you're coming up against a different challenge now in the San Antonio Spurs and Victor Wembanyama. One issue that we've seen with the Wolves in the past 2 years in their playoff runs, while they have reached the Western Conference Finals in both of those years they have been able to sort of feed off of going against teams with weaker rim protection in the first 2 rounds. Obviously, in 24, you see them sweep the Suns and then take the Nuggets down in 7 games. But those are two teams that weren't really great in terms of rim protection. And then they go up against the Mavericks in 24 against a team that was employing Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford starting at their center positions. And that was just a team they weren't able to get through and attack the rim as well as they were in the first two series. And then you see in the next round, in the next year, they beat the Lakers in the first round and then Warriors in the second round. Two teams with not great rim protection last year, and then they come up against OKC, a team that we know has really good rim protection, obviously led by Chet Holmgren, and they weren't able to get their downhill attack as much as possible. Now you're facing probably the best rim protector in the league right now, and arguably one of the greatest all time already. And it's just and without their best downhill force in Anthony Edwards, how much attacking are they going to be able to do? How much of that rim pressure, how many of those points in the paint are they going to be able to get? You're going to have to rely on their outside shooting, which is hard with missing Anthony Edwards, with missing Dante DiVincenzo, having to rely on a guy like Jaden McDaniels, who he did like really shine in that last series against the Nuggets, obviously in Game 6, playing really well in the closeout game. But you're just having to rely on him being your main offensive creator and things like that. And a guy like Sumo, and are they really like ready to take on this level of like offensive creation and offensive ball handling responsibility? The teams did play three times in the regular season. The Wolves won the season series 2-1, but the last game I would say was probably the most best game out of all of them in terms of just who was playing and everything like that. That was a really good game. Wemby putting up 39 and 9, and Anthony Edwards putting up 55 points, with the Spurs just eking that one out, 126 to 123 win. But there was no Gobert in that game, so you can see like how that might have affected Wemby's output and things like that. All in all, I just think the Spurs are just a touch better. And with the uncertainty with Anthony Edwards, my guy, and just his injury history and things like that with like the last couple games, and are they sure that he's going to be able to come back? Right now, it's reported that he's questionable for game 1. Is he really going to play then? Maybe he's pushing more like a game 2, game 3 type of return. Obviously, no Dante DiVincenzo coming back with the Achilles injury. So I'm going to take the Spurs. But just like my pre-playoffs prediction, I'm going to take the Spurs in 7 games. I was just really impressed with what the Wolves did in the last round, even with all their injuries. I think they're going to find a way to push it. So I'm going to take the Spurs in 7 games.
Yeah, I agree with your analysis. I think I do agree with your analysis, but I'm going to go for Spurs in 6. The Wolves are a surprising team. I feel like even in the past 2 years, when they've been underdogs in certain series, they were able to pull through. But then there were some series following like the great comeback or great series that they had that they kind of flattened out the next series immediately. Like for example, against OKC or even the Mavericks that one year. I think this series would just be too much for the Wolves with the injuries. And I think it'll be a physical series. Both teams are top 10 in defensive efficiency, and Wolves play really physical at the guard position, which will be a fun matchup against the Spurs because with Harper, Fox, and Castle, it'll be fun to see how they match up against the Wolves' best defenders. But I think the Spurs also had a good opportunity to kind of showcase how they play without Wemby the one game against the Blazers when they were able to pull that off. And so I think that gave them some good like playoff experience real quick because they're a new team right now. So I think having some of those hurdles in the first round helped kind of build some character. So they should be good for this round.
Yeah, kind of same as you. I also have Spurs in 6 here. I think that kind of like Jay, you were talking about how like Minnesota, they attack the rim a lot. Kind of just like a stat to back that up. Like they're right now in the playoffs, they have like the second highest rim rate. So I mean, clearly like they go with the rain, attack the paint, go with the rim. And when you're going against like Nikola Jokic and then like an injured Aaron Gordon, like that's obviously, gonna lead to a lot of success. But now you're going against a guy like Wemby. He's averaging like 5 blocks a game in the playoffs, ignoring the games that he didn't play. So I think it doesn't really work out in terms of like a battle of styles with the Wolves. And then like adding in the fact that like as we know, DiVincenzo is going to be out for the entire series. So like maybe adapting to like having some perimeter offense won't really work with your best 3-point guy out. So, you know, it's like every time I pick against the Wolves, they prove me wrong. So it's hard to pick against them again. Like they could surprise me, but I think ultimately when your main guy is injured, not sure when he's going to return. Like he is questionable for game 1, but I doubt he'll actually play. We saw like Sham said, it's more likely he returns like game 3 or game 4. So if the Spurs go up 2-0, I think it might be a bit too much of a deficit for Ant to come back and play hero ball and get them back in the series. But I'll take Spurs in 6 out of respect to the Wolves for proving everyone wrong last series and maybe giving Wemby a bit of trouble in his first deeper playoff run. But ultimately, I think just Wemby's too good to bet against, and I'll take the Spurs in 6 as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just I think like this is probably going to be. I mean, this is going to be Wemby's first like real big playoff test, going against a team that employs a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year in Rudy Gobert, obviously his French national teammate from the Olympics 2 years ago. This is going to be his biggest test that he's going to receive on the defensive end. In that, Julius Randle obviously at the power forward position, but he's really strong for that position. He was able to guard Nikola Jokic at times, so they're going to have him in that Wemby matchup at sometimes. Nas Reed coming off their bench as their stretch 5. He's going to challenge him on the offensive end almost in a different way than Gobert will, just having him stretch out from the not being able to stay in the paint, things like that. So I think even more than Anthony Edwards and the other guy in this series is like a young rising talent and things like that we want to see. I think this is really the biggest test for like Wemby, just seeing what's he going to do in his first real playoff matchup where like the odds are sort of stacked against him in the way that the defense is like the defensive matchup is and things like that. But I think it's going to be an exciting series for sure.
Yeah, I also think like where is the Wolves offense really going to come from? I think Spurs play really good on-ball defense, especially in the half-court set, and so even though Randall and Nas Reed are good scorers, I don't think them being able to generate shots is going to be enough. I think they're going to have to find a way for one of their point guards to help set them up really well.
Yeah, and kind of like I think Wemby after they beat the Blazers last series, he was like, like out of respect, giving respect to the Blazers, they're a pretty straightforward team, but like the other teams in the playoffs are going to be much more tactical. So ultimately, I think Wemby, this is going to be his time to, can he prove everyone wrong? Can he, or not wrong? Can he like back up the hype that he has going behind him and get them to the conference finals? I think he'll be able to do it.
All right.
So now we're going to head to the Eastern Conference, and the first series we're going to preview is the New York Knicks versus the Philadelphia 76ers. So obviously both of these teams are pretty hot right now. They've won three straight games in each of their series. The Sixers on the road beating the Celtics, and the Knicks taking care of the Hawks in that absolute blowout game 6 that we saw. So to me, this has probably been the toughest series to predict. I've been going back and forth just because both teams are on fire right now. But I'm ultimately just going to go with the Knicks in 7 here. I think so we saw these teams play in the regular season. They split the series 2-2, which is part of why I have this series going all the way to 7. But I think in terms of ultimately when you go deeper in the playoffs is where depth starts to matter more for me. We see like fatigue start to add up. A lot of players need more like rotation like onto the bench, getting more rest and everything. And so when you look at like how deep each team goes, to me the Sixers pretty much like after their 6 men, they really fall off a lot. Like they have Quentin Grimes off the bench, who's a great bench player, but after him, like they have Andre Drummond as their backup center, who's pretty like meaningless now. So whereas the Knicks, they have a lot of guys on their bench, such as like Jose Alvarado, Deuce McBride. Their backup center, Mitchell Robinson, is definitely putting in good quality minutes. And then even like a guy like Tyler Kolek, if they need like some white boy buckets. But I think depth, I'll give it to the Knicks there. And then also just in general, the Knicks have a lot of good like all NBA like all defense level wings that can give Maxey some trouble, such as like OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges. And some of those guys, they had a pretty rough series to start off, but then we saw like Mikal Bridges rebound in game 6. He had like 20 plus points in his like short minutes that he played. So I think that's another reason that the Knicks can take it. And then the third reason, I mean, honestly, the reason why I have is going 7 in the first place, is just because of like out of respect to Joel Embiid. We saw pretty much once he returned in that Boston series, like he was the game changing factor. He was borderline unstoppable in almost all those games. And so while the Knicks, like, Cat is definitely not a good defender by any means, but I think having a guy like Mitchell Robinson to help get some good defensive minutes in the paint to help slow down Embiid to be pretty beneficial. But at the same time, you got to worry like for the Knicks, Cat, he's like top 5 in fouls per game, and we see Embiid, he's pretty notorious for like drawing guys to foul him, like kind of like foul baiting if you want to call it. So I think Cat might get into some trouble early on in games in terms of fouls, but ultimately I'm just gonna go with the team that has more depth. Also a team that kind of like this is like a win now year for them. If they don't make the finals, they really got to consider blowing things up because it's probably the easiest run of the finals they're gonna have. And then also they just match up better defensively against the Sixers here. But I'm not going to count the Sixers out. That's why I have it going to 7, but I'll still take the Knicks here.
Yeah, similar to you, I'm going to take the Knicks. I'm going to take them in 6 games, so just 1 game less. But that's not meant to like disrespect like the Sixers anyway. They pulled out a really hard fought game 7 win. Obviously a 3-1 comeback against the Celtics. Embiid and Maxey playing their hearts out in that last game, so that was really good. But like you mentioned, this as you get later in the playoffs, it starts to become a matchups are determined based on like the rotations and things like that, and like how fresh are your guys coming into like further and like longer series and things like that. The Knicks being a team, like you said, they play a really strong starting five with a lot of good bench minutes with guys like Miles McBride, Deuce McBride, Jose Alvarado, like you mentioned, Tyler Kolek, and Mitchell Robinson coming off the bench in the front court position. So they play a lot of good guys coming off the bench and they get solid minutes for them. Versus the Sixers, that they do have a really strong starting five, but you're really playing almost a total of 6 guys. That's starting five. Quality minutes from Quentin Grimes off the bench, and then maybe Andre Drummond every now and then just to spell Embiid a little bit. But I think against a team where you could see the Knicks probably play a lot more of that two big lineup, get Mitchell Robinson on the floor along with Karl Anthony Towns, and then you can sort of have someone be able to guard Embiid and maybe have Mitchell Robinson or Cat, one of those two, guarding Embiid, the other guy guarding the non-shooter that the Sixers sometimes have on the floor. Maybe a guy like Kelly Oubre, who's a little bit less of a potent shooter like some of the other guys in the starting lineup are. So I think it's a hard matchup for the Sixers to go against. This playoff matchup when we had this 2 years ago, the 24 playoffs, it was a really crazy matchup right in that game two. We had the Dante DiVincenzo, he had the 2 threes in like the last couple seconds of game two to win that for the Knicks, to steal game two and avoid going down 0-2 in that series. Game five of that series when the Knicks were up 3-1, Tyrese Maxey was crazy. I think it was like 6 points or something like that in the last like 20 seconds of the game. a clutch three to like make sure to save the game in regulation and send it to overtime where the Sixers got the win there. So the Knicks won that series in 6 games, but it was definitely not like a blowout series or anything like that. Definitely a close series. I'm expecting a close series similar to that. I think the Knicks, obviously, another good thing, they have a really good home court advantage. Obviously, the fans at MSG are always helpful and like really good for a good environment there. So I'm going to take the Knicks to win it in 6 games. I just think, like you mentioned before, their rotation and their depth is just too much for the Sixers to handle. Great round one win for them, but I think it's going to come ending in this series for them.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be my favorite series that I'm looking forward to just because of the matchups. And I might have to go with the Sixers in 7 here. It's a star-studded battle on both sides, with the Knicks having Brunson and Towns both averaging close to 25 a game. Brunson at 29, Towns at 23, and then for the Sixers, Embiid's almost averaging 30 and Maxey at 28. And so I think it's going to come down to some of those role players like Edgecombe versus Anunoby and Bridges. I think the Sixers were also battle tested this time, and they actually succeeded. Even in the post-game interview, I kind of see how Embiid's light kind of changed, winning his first ever Game 7. So hopefully that could give him some playoff experience going into the next series when the games get close. I also think it's strange that the Knicks just sometimes have these lapses in some of these games. I thought that they were overmatching the Hawks a good bit, and they were in some of those games up double digits in the fourth quarter, but blowing the lead, and CJ McCollum bringing it down to the last minute for some of those games as well. And so I think the Sixers can take advantage of that, especially like where we saw against the Celtics, where they came back in a couple of those games as well.
Yeah, honestly, like if Embiid can stay healthy, like I could definitely see the Sixers taking the series just because like as good of a defender as Mitchell Robinson is, like you can't really play him on the court for a long time because I mean he's like a Cohen on offense, and then also like we've seen it many times like the hack a Mitch strat where like you just hack him, get him at the free throw line. So I think honestly, like if the Sixers win, it's gonna be through Embiid, and so if he can stay healthy, I could totally see them winning it. Honestly,
Yeah, and I think one guy that I think could be like an underrated person on the Sixers for why it could be like a big series for them and a potential series win for the Sixers, I think it could be VJ Edgecombe because we know that Maxey, obviously Brunson is not going to be guarding Maxey in that point guard matchup because he's obviously not the most talented defender in that starting five for the Knicks. They got a lot of other guys that are better suited to do that. You might have a guy like Josh Hart or a guy like Mikal Bridges in the starting lineup trying to defend Maxey. So you're more than likely going to get VJ Edgecombe matching up with Brunson and just trying to hide him on Brunson or hide him on VJ as opposed to giving the Maxey matchup. You might be able to see, all right, can VJ Edgecombe exploit that matchup and get some of his points on the just running action on like the outside of that, like not worrying about Maxey getting his points and things like that. Can VJ Edgecombe take advantage of that matchup? So I think that might be one thing. We obviously talked about a lot in the last series against the Hawks about Jalen Brunson being a guy that was like not a great defender, and he's like a really good like opening access point for a lot of other teams to attack them on offense. So can VJ Edgecombe do the same thing that we talked about with the Sixers or the Hawks doing last series, specifically CJ McCollum? Can VJ Edgecombe sort of fill that role and do that for the Sixers this time?
Yeah, I also think these games will be really close down to the line, especially since Maxey and Brunson tend to elevate their game in the clutch. So I think there'll be a lot of back and forth, and it probably will come down to whoever has the ball last.
yeah, definitely the most entertaining series, probably definitely in the East, maybe even in the whole second round. But I guess we'll see what happens.
All right, so the last series that we have in the Eastern Conference for our last semifinal is the Pistons versus the Cavs. Obviously, the Cavs, we just recording now, is they just beat the Raptors in that Game 7 to advance to the second round. The Pistons obviously advancing earlier today. So this series, two teams coming off of winning Game 7s. One team in the Pistons eating a 3-1 comeback, even as the one seed against the Orlando Magic. So I think it's a series that with two teams probably didn't expect to have as long as first round battles as they did. Probably not expecting the type of resistance they got from their opponent. But I think that probably prepared them well for what they're going to see in the second round. So in this series, I am going to take the Pistons in 6 games. And I think this is just an overall better matchup. This is one of the best matchups I think the Pistons have in the entire playoff field in terms of the Eastern Conference side of the bracket. The Pistons, what they really did in the regular season was thriving off of their better physicality and their better just like effort and overall against the teams they played through. That's part of why they had a really good regular season record and things like that. And I think this is a team going against a team in the Cavaliers where they can really just like use that physicality to their advantage and just be able to like lean on and just like beat up a team that's not as physically dominant, physically as imposing as the Pistons are. Obviously, in a really strong front court the Cavs do have with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. But while Jared Allen is a player that is really strong and things like that and has a good physical presence, Evan Mobley isn't that type of guy. He's the type of guy that has a little bit more of a finesse game and things like that. And while he can still score around the basket and things like that, his paint presence isn't as strong as a guy like Jalen Duren or even a guy like Isaiah Stewart that plays some of their backup 5 minutes. So I really just think this series is going to come down to just the Pistons having more physicality. They do have a lot of good guard defenders too, so they have a guy like Asar Thompson and even Cunningham, their starting guard. He's able to like defend really well, and especially as a guy that's their main offensive engine and things like that. So they do have strong guard defenders there. So I think they can sort of mitigate, not completely take away, but mitigate what the Cavs can do with Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. And James Harden, I don't think I need to mention this any more times than we already have, but I will again. He's just a playoff choker. So we didn't see it in the first round. We saw a couple games in the first round where he wasn't to his like typical regular season levels and things like that, but it wasn't to the full meltdown levels that we've seen before. Who knows? That could still be happening. So like that is something that the could happen in this Pistons Cavs series. So I'm expecting the Pistons to close this out in 6 games.
Yeah, I also have the Pistons in 6 games, but I feel like the last series was kind of alarming by the Pistons. It's hard to gauge whether it was just the Magic kind of overachieving or if the Pistons were just really rusty. But I did like how the Pistons finished it off. And Cade's been on an absolute tear. He's averaging 32, 5, and 7. So I think that's a good sign for the Pistons. I think Duren is concerning his performance. You guys both had him on your All-NBA teams, and he was averaging 19.5 and 10.5 in the regular season. He dropped all the way down to 9.8 and 8.5 rebounds in the playoffs. That's kind of a substantial drop off. And if anything, it'll be a tougher matchup against the Cavs, especially with Mobley and Jared Allen, but hopefully he can pick it up. I think the Cavs' biggest strengths here are their three biggest like leading scorers. Mitchell, Harden, and Mobley all average above 20 points per game, so that's 60 points right there. But I think the rocky start for the Pistons and then finishing it off strong will kind of serve as a boost, I think, this series.
Yeah, I mean, like just hopping on the train here. I also got Pistons in 6. I mean, as much as I want my guy Donovan Mitchell to finally make it past the second round, don't think it's this year, unfortunately. I think the Pistons, they just like, as you guys kind of said, like both of these teams had some pretty alarming first round series, especially the Pistons going down 3-1 to like the 8th seed. But ultimately, I think like if their game 7 win wasn't maybe that like comfortable, if it was a closer game, I'd still have some doubts, but they pretty much look like the 1 seed, like regular season version of themselves. Like no more rust. Everyone seemed healthy. Just like looking at some of the stats here, like we saw K drop like 32 and 12. Tobias Harris, which their biggest problem was always like who's going to be that second guy on offense. It was supposed to be Jalen Duren, but he was having some like pretty horrible numbers, as you said, Rohan. So I mean, then we saw like Tobias Harris step up, drop 30. Obviously, like how far can you go in the playoffs with Tobias Harris as your second option? I guess we'll see, but I think it'll be good enough for this series. And then we saw like Jalen Duren, as bad as he was, finally like slightly rebound in his game 7, dropping like a 15 and 15 double double. And then like Asar Thompson just being the defensive nightmare that he is, 2 blocks, 2 steals. And so overall, I think the Pistons, they just present too much physicality and defense for the Cavs to handle. Then looking at like the Cavs side of things, the Cavs, they were up 2-0 and then they lose 2 to the Raptors. And then they go to like game 7 against like a first time playoff team with like a second year coach, really young team overall. Definitely shouldn't have even been there in the first place. Like the Cavs shouldn't have been at a game 7. So I think ultimately, yeah, they have a really good front court duo that I think they might even have the advantage on the glass on like the offense with Mobley and Jared Allen, but I don't think it's enough to overcome the overall physicality. Like we see the Pistons right now, they have the number 1 defensive rating in the entire playoffs. So I think that'll be too much for the Cavs to handle. And especially with like a Star Thompson being able to guard like positions 1 through 5, being able to probably slow down Donovan Mitchell. I mean, James Harden hasn't been going that fast to be slowed down that much. I think it was either 2 or 3 games where he had like more turnovers than field goals made. So I don't think the Cavs are going to get it done. I'm going to have Pistons in 6 here.
Yeah, and I think for this matchup, you have to sort of look at this as two teams going in sort of the opposite directions in terms of their overall trajectory in the last couple of years. If you look at the Pistons, obviously no one really expected this team. They expected this team to still be in the playoffs and playoff contention and potentially for one of the high seeds. But I don't think anyone really saw this team being a number 1 seed. And while they did have a struggle in their last matchup against the Magic, and having to go to 7 games, they still obviously pulled it out in the end. And they were still able to have a really strong regular season, and they're still making it to the second round of the playoffs. And it's a team that's definitely on the rise. And you can see a lot of their young players starting to take form and things like that, and the overall roster taking shape. But versus the Cavs, this is the 4th year, I think, of their team with this current iteration with Donovan Mitchell, obviously with the keys to the car and everything like that, and just like this sort of build around him. And it hasn't worked out the way you'd hoped. Like you mentioned, like Tish, like the Donovan Mitchell hasn't been able to get past the second round so far. It's just if it goes again the way it has been the last couple of years, is this potentially something where the Cavs front office is going to have to look at this and say, all right, what are we going to have to change? We obviously swapped out James Harden for Darius Garland this year. Is that going to change anything in this playoffs? If it doesn't, then you're going to look at, was that move a mistake? Or we're going to have to give James Harden more money, which is not going to end up in anything like that? Or we're gonna have to move one of the bigs or things like that. So I think this could really, if the Cavs are to lose this game or lose this series, I think this would really cause their front office as a whole to just look at it and like see like, all right, there's a lot of questions that we have to answer in terms of this roster makeup and things like that.
Yeah, I also think like a key point is that both of them have kind of reached their cap of like the second round. So I think kind of overcoming that will be huge. And there's no bigger year to do it than this year with all four teams kind of being inexperienced past the conference finals. And so each of these teams is probably looking at it like if we can get past this round, then we have a really good shot at getting to the finals.
That's kind of like the perfect transition because I guess like one question I had to kind of wrap things up was now that we've seen like two quote unquote like powerhouses drop out with like the Celtics and the Nuggets, do you guys feel pretty comfortable saying that this year's champion will be from the West, or do you still think there could be an Eastern team that poses a threat?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I think it will be a Western team for sure. Spurs and OKC are just like super star-studded, and they had really good regular season performances as well. And I think like the good like sweeps or a gentleman sweep in the first round was kind of a good indicator that both of them are pretty prepared to make a deep run in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with him. I think it's more than likely it's gonna be a West team coming out of the playoffs and are coming out of the championship, coming out of the championship as a whole, and being the winner this year. But I'm gonna pull a parallel from like the NFL this year. We saw in the most recent NFL season in the NFC Championship, we had the Seahawks and the Rams, and almost everyone was saying, "All right, this has got to be like this is the de facto Super Bowl," almost because really no one believed in the two teams in the AFC Championship. I think when we get to the Western Conference Finals, and obviously all our predictions are going to be it's going to be OKC versus Spurs, regardless of who we think wins in the East and comes out of the East side and is in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think we're all going to see that the championship is really going to be happening in this Western Conference Finals. We just have two insanely star-studded teams, like you said, Rohan, in this Western Conference Finals in San Antonio and OKC. And I just think whoever wins that matchup is probably going to be more than likely the team winning the championship.
Yeah, it's definitely like I fully agree. I think the West is going to give the champion this year. And to me, like in terms of just like a viewer from my POV, like the Western Conference Finals are the NBA Finals this year. Probably the best basketball we'll get. So now we're just going to talk about some of our X factors for all these series, just like some players or other factors that might make or break if a team can win or not. So starting off in the West for Lakers versus OKC. For the OKC, I think the X factor to me is just going to be like J-Dub. Can he come back after his like hamstring injury and be the same? You know, like give them offensive production outside of Shea. I think his health would be a big question mark here. And then for the Lakers, Austin Reeves kind of on like a similar note. Like he's coming off a pretty major injury. And the Lakers are going to need pretty much all the offensive production they can get. So can he keep up his regular season production coming off the injury? That's going to be my X factor.
Yeah, for OKC, I have McCain. I think this is just like good minutes for him off the bench, and maybe later, like in the deeper run in the playoffs, he'll probably need that second rotation to put up some good points. So I think McCain has a good opportunity to kind of lead the team there. And then for the Lakers, I have DeAndre Ayton averaging a double-double last round. Kind of showed that he's like a good rebounder, and I think he'll be helpful in the paint against OKC, where they usually run like the double centers with Hartenstein and Holmgren. So Ayton will be a big piece.
Yeah, so for the Lakers, just like you said, Tish, I'm going to take Austin Reeves. And just like you said, the injury reason for him, like, can he be back to full strength? And then for OKC, I'm going to take Chet Holmgren. So this is mostly just like the converse of what you said with DeAndre Ayton, Rohan. Just like, can he limit some of what DeAndre Ayton was able to do last series against the Rockets? A little bit of a better rim protector than Şengün, obviously. So DeAndre Ayton's going to have a bit, bigger challenge this time. But can he give him some good points on the offensive end, just like going against the guy who's a weaker rim protector in DeAndre Ayton. So I'm going to take Chet Holmgren for OKC.
And then going to the other Western Conference series for Spurs Timberwolves. For the Timberwolves, I think my X factor is going to be Rudy Gobert. We saw him put like an all-time defense performance against Jokic. So can he do the same against Wemby? And if so, maybe they can get the upset there. And then for the Spurs, I think my X factor is going to be Steph Castle. You know, there's a lot of talk about Wemby's big like playoff debut, but it's also Steph Castle. He's pretty young, same thing. He's kind of had some down moments in the Blazers series. So if he can get things going again, I think he could be a real big factor for the Spurs making this series shorter than people think.
Yeah, for the Wolves, I have Terrence Shannon Jr. I think he's a great scorer, and I think that's what the Wolves will need with, especially with their injuries. And then for the Spurs, I have Luke Cornett. I think those minutes with Wemby on the bench, having another tall center will really help when the Wolves like to run big lineups.
Yeah, so for the Spurs, I'm going to take Dylan Harper. So he's their guy that like a lot of their bench groups, he's the lead guard running that. So when the Wolves have some of their bench guys on the floor, which obviously shifted back a little bit due to their injuries, so their bench players might be a little bit worse than like the rotation previously was. Can Dylan Harper take advantage of that and see what he can do, similar to what he did in that game three against Portland with no Wemby out there? And then for Wolves, I'm gonna take Naz Reid. So he's gonna be their like backup big. He's gonna play that stretch 5 minutes. So if he's on the floor at the same time as Wemby, can he sort of stretch out the Wolves offense and stretch out the Spurs defense and just allow a little more space and get Wemby away from the basket to help their offense overall?
And then heading out to the East for Knicks versus Sixers, I think for the Sixers, my X factor is going to be just pretty much play an easy Joel Embiid. Can he stay healthy? Because he looked pretty much unstoppable against the Celtics. So if he can probably on his own win them a series. And then for the Knicks, kind of on like the opposite end of things, I think Mitchell Robinson is the X factor here. Can he live up to his like defensive status and contain Embiid while also not being a problem for their team on offense?
Yeah, for the Sixers, I have Paul George. I think he definitely has a diminished role compared to his previous years, but even if he's able to provide a slight boost for the Sixers in addition to all their other scoring options, I think he can have a huge impact. And then for the Knicks, I have Mikal Bridges. He had some of those shooting struggles last series, and so he can really help the Knicks with some 3-point shooting this series.
Yeah, and then so for the Sixers, I'm going to be taking VJ Edgecombe. I mentioned in like the preview before, we talked about how VJ is going to be getting some of the weaker defensive players on the Knicks being able to guard him in this matchup. So can he take advantage of that and do some more secondary scoring alongside either Maxey or Embiid as the primary scorers for the Sixers? And for the Knicks, I'm going to take Josh Hart. So Josh Hart's probably a guy, Josh Hart, a player that I love, like what he does for the team and things like that. But he's going to be a guy that's going to get some of in terms of the Sixers, they're going to put some of their players on just rest on defense and things like that because he's a guy that's not really that threatening of a shooter. So can he put some more of the pressure on the Sixers defense by making some of his outside shots, getting good rim pressure and things like that? So I'm going to pick Josh Hart as my X factor for the Knicks.
And then lastly, wrapping up the Eastern Conference for the Pistons versus Cavs. As far as my X factors go, I think for the Pistons, I'm going to take Tobias Harris. We saw, especially in the game seven of the last series, like having another second offensive option for Cade really helps open things up. So if he can continue to put up performances like that, I think that'll give a lot of problems to the Cavs. And then on the Cavs side of things, I think Evan Mobley is my X factor here. Obviously, the Pistons definitely have the Cavs outmatched in terms of physicality, but Mobley, former defensive player of the year winner, can he kind of help control some of the physicality that the Pistons are imposing and give the Cavs a boost there?
Yeah, I think we're on the exact same wavelength here. I also had Tobias Harris for the Pistons. I don't think Duran had that great of a scoring series last series, and so Tobias Harris can be that great second option for scoring, especially in that mid range. And then for the Cavs, I actually have two here. I have Mobley and Jared Allen, and I think dominating that glass will really help Cavs get some offensive rebounds.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it 3 for 3. We're all in the same area with the front court in this series, especially. I think it's gonna be a really physical series, so it makes sense. But for the Pistons, I'm gonna take Jalen Duren. That's a guy that did not play well at all in this Orlando Magic series. Obviously the Pistons did come back, but it was mostly due to like not really with anything that he did in the series. They mostly overcame his like bad performances and things like that. So can he play a little bit better? He's gonna be in a matchup where he can dominate physically a little bit better than he could against a really strong Orlando Magic team. So can he play better minutes and get more offensive rebounds and put more pressure on the glass and things like that? Then conversely with the Cavs, I'm going to take Evan Mobley specifically from the front court. And can he sort of do what you mentioned before as a former defensive player of the year winner, Tish? Can he put together a good defensive game plan and just like allow like the Cavs to just be better overall and like help the perimeter defenders a little bit? So I'm going to take Mobley and then Jalen Duren. All right, so one question that I have for you guys, and this is more in terms of just if looking at it from a broader scale, a macro type scale with this playoffs, obviously with two powerhouses like you mentioned before being knocked out in the Nuggets and the Celtics, I think it seems it's a little bit obviously it's more wide open in the East now that we talk about it and that we talked about, and it seems like the West is going towards one specific conference finals matchup. But I want to ask you guys, who do you think has the most to gain in terms of their all-time standing and their all-time rankings in the hierarchy based on how the playoffs are going? I'll give you my answer actually, and it's an answer that's going a little bit off the board, but I think this is obviously based on if they're able to win the championship, and that would mean they obviously got through one of OKC or the Spurs. I'm going to take Jalen Brunson actually. So I think Jalen Brunson, and first part of that is playing in a team with the Knicks, such a big market, one of the biggest markets in the NBA overall. Bringing that team a championship, their first since 1973. He would first of all just be like regaled as like a hero in that city for like what he did. He's already being like chalked up as a hero and things like that for just bringing him to the conference finals and things like that last year. But just going even a step further and winning the whole finals, he'd be just like revered in that city. Obviously, the next part of it, I think, in the NBA, just as we've seen in a whole, like you really can't win with your best player being a small guard, other than if your name is Steph Curry and you've got one of the greatest dynasties of all time alongside you. He could sort of put that not necessarily end that notion because I think it's still going to stay true for a long time in the NBA. You really do need size. You need your best player specifically to have a lot of size at their position. But he could sort of end it for a while and be like, hey, you can win it with a small guard at your point guard position and things like that. With your point guard, your small guard, point guard being the one that controls and doing everything in terms of the offense and things like that. So I think he could sort of change that notion a little bit and just overall being like show that he can be the one that's leading a team to a championship and things like that. And obviously, if they're to win the championship, it means they're more than likely beat OKC or the Spurs. And if they're to beat the Spurs, that means a small guard team was able to take down a team with probably one of the greatest rim protectors of all time, or they were able to beat a team with some of the greatest perimeter defense of all time in OKC. So I think Jalen Brunson is my answer. But what about you guys? Who are some of you guys you think could have most to gain?
Yeah, I have like a two-part answer here. I think first one, obviously OKC with Shea. I think with the parity in the NBA right now, we have a lot of stars that are at one ring, and we kind of have these early discussions after they win their first one, whether they're the next face of the league. Like we kind of saw with Jokic, with Giannis, Tatum and Brown each have one. And so I think if Shea can get his second one this year, especially with Jokic being knocked out early, then I think you can have kind of those discussions about he is the face of the league, he is the best player. I think right now there's still some debate between two or three players, and I think that kind of solidify it. And that'd also be the first time where we have repeat champions and someone with multiple rings in a long time. I think my kind of off the rail answer here would kind of be the Sixers, honestly, if they were able to even make the finals. Embiid's been ridiculed a lot over the past few years. The Sixers have also just gone through an iteration of a lot of rosters with with Butler and with Harden, and so I think finally being able to like kind of go over the hump now, especially when the Celtics are knocked out, could kind of revitalize Embiid's career as well as Paul George as well. I think now is like late stage end of his career, and then with an up and coming star Maxey and Edgecombe, it kind of just be like a fairy tale ending for the Sixers if it was able to work out.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, like you kind of brought up Shea, and to me, that feels like one of the obvious answers just because, like yet another season of likely regular season MVP, then finals champion, finals MVP. Like, does he crack the top 15 all time? That's another discussion. But with like the non-chalk answer, I think I'm gonna go with the Cavs, specifically James Harden. We've like ridiculed that man so much, probably deservingly so for his playoff struggles that he's had over the years. So if the Cavs could somehow win a ring, I feel like he would. And also for his like all-time discussion, because like obviously you have like the big three shooting guards where you have like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and Dwayne Wade. And then outside of it, it's like there's a debate like, is it Jerry West? Is it Allen Iverson? Is it James Harden, Clyde Drexler? So if James Harden can get a ring, he could definitely solidify himself as like the bona fide fourth best shooting guard of all time. And then like similarly for Donovan Mitchell on that team, like we just talked about, can't ever get past the second round. So if he was able to get a ring, he could put that narrative to rest. But James Harden, he's pretty much accomplished almost all there is to basketball outside of like postseason success. He's won an MVP. He's, like average 37. He's up there in the assists or triple doubles. He's made the playoffs every year of his career, but he hasn't won anything in them. So if the Cavs could win a ring, I think it could do a lot for Harden's legacy.
Yeah, and I think one more thing that in terms of like the overall structure of the league and things like that, especially this is more specifically because of the Nuggets, not really with the Celtics, but with Jokic going out and a guy that coming into the season, maybe like coming into like the middle of the season before he had his long injury absence, was a guy that everyone was consensus this guy's the best player in the world. A guy going out like that in a playoff round where he gets thoroughly dominated by his matchup in Rudy Gobert, and that's sort of leaving the title open for like best player in the world and things like that. I think you could see two guys specifically in the West, Shea and Wemby, if they're to battle it out in the Western Conference, whoever comes out of that and potentially wins the championship, I think they'd have a really good grasp on that. Maybe even a guy like Cade Cunningham coming out of the East, if they're able to win the championship. He's sort of a guy that's getting into like those top 10, top 15 conversations and like maybe slowly inching his way towards top five, but doing something like bringing the Pistons all the way to a championship, more than likely having to carry them on the offensive end. That could be a guy that inches his way into the best player conversation. But I think that's also something that's opened up now too.
Yeah, I'm also surprised neither of you guys said Wemby by chance too. I think it's unprecedented seeing a player that young if he was able to lead his team to the finals and win, especially coming off his DPOY win and also being in top three in MVP voting as well. I think you'd have some serious discussions there, especially because of his defensive presence at his size and also his offensive performance as well.
Tell you one guy that I immediately ruled out was LeBron James. I mean, the man's has done it all, greatest of all time. He's already done everything there is to do. Doesn't he? I mean, obviously, another ring would be nice, but it's just, it's like pouring water in the ocean. Like he doesn't need it anymore. He's done it all. But I think that's gonna wrap it up for episode 8 here. Thanks for coming on, Rohan. It was a blast. Hope you had some fun talking about the playoffs, and guess we'll see who made the best predictions in a couple of weeks here. But comment down any ideas for next episode, and we'll see you guys.